Hey, it's Sonia, and welcome to the Smarta Podcast. Hi, I am so glad that you're here with me today. I wanted to start off by saying that in today's episode, we're gonna move away from how to become more efficient in your work life and focus on actually how you can reconnect with yourself. On today's episode, I'll bring you someone who's most likely done it all. From having conquered an Ironman distance triathlon to walking 500 miles across Spain, today's episode is surely going to be one that you don't want to miss out on sharing, because it's all about how you can become more aware of yourself and how getting out of your comfort zone by something that seems impossible at the beginning can be the route to leading you to really connecting with yourself and finding out what type of person you are more than anyone else can do for you, simply by embarking on a self-discovering journey. But before I tell you more about award-winning author Blaine Rada, as an accomplished thought leader, public speaker, and debater, Blaine Rada helps individuals and organizations differentiate themselves and achieve their goals in a highly competitive environment. Blaine's travels and adventures started early. Between kindergarten and high school, he lived in 8 places, attended 8 different schools, and spent 3 years at a free school, which encouraged independent learning. Blaine was named America's Greatest Thinker in 2005 and 2022. Blaine holds the National Speakers Association's highest earned designation, Certified Speaking Professional, CSP. Notably, in 2019, he published an award-winning book chronicling his inspirational 500-mile trek off the Camino de Santiago across Spain. And he is an avid recreational athlete, having conquered an Ironman distance triathlon and multiple ultramarathons, including a 100-mile race. Blaine is a Mensa member with certificates in distance education from Indiana University and applied neuroscience from the Neuroscience School. His public career and personal achievements exemplify his commitment to excellence, innovation, and continuous learning. And now let's get this conversation started. Hi, Blaine. It's so great to have you on this podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I am so pleased to be a part of it.
Likewise. Okay, I want to go ahead and dive deep right now into it. I want to take you back all the way to the very beginning, to when you were a child, okay? You mentioned that you've changed school 8 times. And that's a lot. Coming from someone that's never moved city, never moved schools even, and that's constantly watched people come in and go out, you start seeing 2 very different personalities. Ones that take that advantage and become completely extroverted people, and some that are completely introverted people. So my question for you, Blaine, as to start off, is can you share a bit about your early life and how constantly being on the run and moving around and attending different schools influenced who you are today?
Yeah, well, let me take you back even further to before I was even born.
Oh, no.
And the reason I'm going to do that is that my mother, I was conceived when she was only 17, and she was married, unfortunately, to an alcoholic with a violent temper, and their marriage was on the rocks before I was even born. They were in trouble, and they sought the advice of a local priest. And the priest did not think that their marriage could survive the stress of having a baby. And he recommended to them that once I was born, I should be put up for adoption.
Wow.
Now, my mother tells me that as soon as she heard those words, she basically stopped listening, because her intention was that no matter how hard it was going to be, and she knew that it would be hard, that she was going to be my mother. The priest actually was right. Their marriage did not survive. In fact, they were divorced when I was only 1 year old. And I say that because while we moved around a lot, and I was alone a lot. My mom had to work several jobs to put food on the table. She didn't remarry until I was about 12. So for most of my childhood, it was just she and I moving around. And so yeah, it was kind of chaotic, and I suppose it was kind of hard. But I guess even as a child, I realized this could have been a lot worse. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I could
Mm-hmm.
have been in a house with an alcoholic father, or I could have been put up for adoption. And so while I didn't like all those moves, and it was definitely hard to keep going to new schools, I was definitely not an extrovert. And I still to this day, I consider myself to be an introvert. And how that actually helped me was that I would kind of sit back and watch my environment and understand it and learn it before I tried to engage with it. And so I always had this ability to kind of adapt to whatever my
Mm-hmm.
surroundings were, and I wasn't focused on trying to fit in. I wasn't trying to kind of be popular or be liked. I was just
Mm-hmm.
trying to kind of make sure that I could maintain a sense of normalcy, or just be accepted. And so the easiest way for me to do that was actually to be adaptable, to just be more of the person that stands back and watches what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
and then figures out how to act in that particular environment. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it taught me some skills that have served me well throughout my life, because being adaptable, being able to be in different environments where you can't control what's happening around you,
Mm-hmm.
is kind of normal in life. And definitely the fact that my life in the early years was so kind of unstable,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of resolved as a child that I didn't want my adult life to be like that. And
Mm-hmm.
so I've strived really hard to have a life that is much more stable, not only for myself, but my family, my own children.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I guess I look at all that turmoil as, well, first of all, it could have been worse. And as difficult as it was, it gave me some life skills that have served me really well. So I'm actually really thankful for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, from what I understand, from a very young age, you were already set for success. I mean, you developed those characteristics that you sound like a very disciplined person, like a very determined person to achieve your goals, to strive for achieving your better dream life.
For
Um,
sure. Yeah.
mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
was very important to me. I mean, and it's not to, I'm not being critical of my mother or of my upbringing, but my
No.
childhood was not the life that I wanted as an
Mm-hmm.
adult. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was very determined to do whatever I could to make sure that my life was not going to be what I was experiencing when I was young.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I also suppose that gives you that hunger to strive for, the best version of yourself that you can be. And Blaine, before we got on this podcast, you've mentioned that you spent 3 years at a free school, which is a concept that many people might be unfamiliar with, including me, actually. So, could you give us an overview of what it is?
Yeah, so this was kind of a movement, I think, that took place in the U.S. Probably in the late 1960s, early
Mm-hmm.
1970s, and it was kind of a anti-establishment idea where people were frustrated with the school system and decided that they wanted their children to be in something different. And
Mm-hmm.
so the free school idea was that it was very unstructured, and so there were teachers, but the subjects were kind of up to the student. So
Self-paced.
for yeah, so yeah, I mean, I was allowed to kind of even pick what I wanted to learn, and
Mm-hmm.
so honestly, I did what I liked and what I was good at, and so for three
Mm-hmm.
years, I basically did math because I was good at it and I liked it,
Mm-hmm.
and I did art, not because I was any good at it, but I just liked the creativity of art.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't do reading and writing, and all the other subjects that you would normally have in a traditional school. So while I kind of think that experience ignited my creativity and let me kind of be a free thinker and kind of, just experiment with different things. The challenge, of course, when I went back to a traditional school was that I was 3 years behind in subjects that I hadn't been paying any attention to. And so
Mhm.
my grandmother, actually, my mother's mother, in one summer, got all 3 years got me caught up in 3 years of schooling, so that when I went
Wow.
back to a traditional school in the fifth grade, I was actually ready to slide right in with everybody else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I guess, giving yourself that sort of freedom at the start came with its costs. But at the same time, as you've said yourself, it ignited your inspiration. So even though you've told me a little bit about it, I want to know if you could tell me how your experience at the free school shaped your approach to learning now.
Well, I think it made me, and this has a good side and a bad side. When I had to be in a more structured traditional school environment, it made me ask a lot of questions about why things had to be done in a particular way. There's a lot of rules that you have to follow, and I understand why the rules are there. They have to try to keep order in the classroom, and they want students to learn in a particular way. But because it was so foreign to me from what I had been doing for 3 years, I really questioned, and not always out loud, but certainly to myself, why does this have to be done in this particular way? Why do you have to write your name on this exact spot on the piece of paper? Couldn't you put your name in a different part of the paper? I mean, where they would still see it. And so, that was a bit of a challenge, I guess, because obviously, if I were to say those things out loud, a teacher would probably find that kind of disruptive, and that I wasn't following rules. But as certainly throughout my life and as an adult, I think asking questions, again, not in a challenging, way, but just to be curious about, well, does it have to be this way, or why is it that way? I think school, unfortunately, oftentimes kind of takes that out of children. I think children naturally are very curious, and they
Hmm.
ask a lot of questions, and sometimes they're not really permitted to do that. And then as adults, we stop asking those same questions that are really, I think, are important. So again, just like everything in my childhood, it was a mixed blessing. There were things that were challenging about it, but many of those
Hmm.
challenges, I think,
Hmm.
ultimately turned into something very positive.
I agree. I agree. And that can either mean that the questions that you would usually ask as a child get a little bit more, placed under the shadow as a adult later in life, can be the difference that sets you apart from maybe really guiding yourself onto a values of a brand. If you're an employee in a marketing firm and you want to create this pitch, perhaps to put it in focus in terms of something else as well.
Hmm.
I also would like to pause here with your childhood and skip forward a bit in your journey, um, on something that kind of popped up as you were talking, because you told me that you don't particularly enjoy walking. So it got me thinking about how all of a sudden in your life you embarked on this 500-mile trek in Spain. And I want to find out what initially inspired you to walk, and that's putting it lightly, embarking on the Camino de Santiago.
Yeah, well, my dislike of walking is really because for most of my adult life I've been a runner. And so
Uh,
I just enjoy running. And if you told me that I needed to go somewhere that was 4 miles away, I'd probably rather run there than walk there. Um, but I was inspired, as many Americans have been inspired, to do the Camino after watching a movie that came out, I think, around 2010 called The Way. And
the
the
way.
backdrop, the story behind The Way is all about the Camino. And I saw that film, and I just had this sense that that was something that I would do someday.
Hmm.
And that's happened several times in my life where I've just gotten this idea that here's this thing that somehow means something to me, and I don't know why, and I don't know when I'll do it, and I don't know how I'll do it, but I just kind of make a note to myself that this is a thing that I will do someday.
Hmm.
And several years later, it kind of just came back into my head, and I was able to make it work from the standpoint of, getting the time off and being able to leave my home.
Mm-hmm.
But the real idea came from just being so impressed by that movie and the experience that they showed these people having. I just wanted to have my own version of that.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask why you decided to do it in terms of, if the Camino itself inspired you, the emotions, as you said, inspired you that you felt while watching the movie, or was it the fact that it was something so atypical in, I mean, to what I think, from your average typical day that you could do and
Yeah. Well, and of course, I got that question a lot. Why would you do such a thing, right? And I still have people in my family that probably are wondering, even to this day, why did I do such a thing?
it's
Um,
inspiring. It's
I think there are two reasons, and there are as many reasons to do the Camino as there are people doing it. I mean, it originated as a pilgrimage,
mm-hmm,
and it's been walked by millions of people for over 1,000 years.
mm-hmm,
And I didn't grow up with any specific religious tradition, so that really wasn't a reason for me. In fact, I didn't even really
mm-hmm.
understand what a pilgrimage meant. But the two things that drew me to it were the physical
Aspect.
aspect of it,
Mm-hmm,
because I'm kind of attracted to those types of things. I push myself to do endurance type physical events. And so
mm-hmm,
the idea of taking a month to walk 500 miles across a country, just the physical nature of that actually appealed to me. And obviously, that doesn't appeal to a lot of people. But that was one of the things that attracted to me. But I needed it to be more than that. If I was going to leave my home and my work and my family for a month
mm-hmm,
and travel to a country where I hardly spoke the language, I needed this to not be a vacation. I needed it to somehow be transformative. And
mm-hmm,
so the best way that I could put that into words was that I wanted it to be a spiritual journey as well. So there
mm-hmm,
was the physical part of it that was attractive to me. And
mm-hmm,
I didn't know how the spiritual part would take place, but I just wanted that. I had the intention that I wanted to come back a better version of myself, kind of like,
mm-hmm.
Blaine 2.0. I
Right.
wanted to just be a better human being as a
Mm-hmm,
result of having done it.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I can only imagine there were a couple of obstacles you had to endure on your way. And I'm curious now if you could share some of the biggest challenges that you had to overcome while doing the journey.
Well, you're right. There were many, and I'm sure for most people there are many. The two that come to mind is that I suffered. Oh, well, and hopefully we'll talk about this word suffering later, because that's actually something that I try to think of in a different way now since the
Mm,
Camino. I had a lot of pain. The pace that I was on, not the speed, but the length, the distance that I was covering every day was
mhm,
much more than most people do. And that was
mhm,
only because I only had so many days to do this, and I wanted to do the entire thing. And so I just knew how much I had to walk every day to make that happen. And so I was walking distances that most people don't walk. And the consequence of that was that starting on the second day, I started developing blisters, and they
mm.
just got worse and worse and bigger and bigger. I mean, my feet were a
Yeah.
medical disaster. And so there was a lot of physical pain that it
Mhm,
took me a long time to get to the point where I could just accept it and not be so focused on it every day, because
mhm,
early on it was hard to ignore it. And so I would say
mhm,
that was a challenge. And then you don't sleep much because I chose to stay in hostels for the most part.
mhm,
Every once in a while, I would treat myself to a hotel or some place where I could have a private room. But
mhm,
usually I slept in, communal living arrangements,
mhm, mhm.
and it's noisy. And not so much because people are awake, but just all the noises that people make while they're asleep.
Mhm.
And who knows, I could have been one of those people making noise too. But, there were many nights when it just felt like I only got a couple of hours of sleep.
Mhm, mhm.
There were nights where I'm staying next door to a church, and the church bells are ringing literally every 15 minutes all during the night, and so
Yeah,
it was kind of
yeah,
hard to sleep through that,
yeah.
but that was what it was. I mean, it wasn't something that upset me, but it was definitely, I think, something that contributed to the challenge was that I really wasn't getting a lot of rest.
That puts you up to the test. Yeah. I want to know actually how you overcame and how you could take your mind off of it and focus on what mattered, the nature, your spiritual journey. What was the thing that made you tick and realize, actually, I can get myself through this?
Yeah, well, I think as I've had to do many times in my life, I just had to realize that it's not about me, and so back to that word suffering, and people would use different words to describe what I'm saying, but there is pain that we experience in life, and we all do. There's just no way to get through life without experiencing different kinds of pain. But whether we choose to suffer through that or not, I believe is more of a choice. So it's kind of like the pain part is mandatory, right? There's going to be things that happen to us, whether they be physical,
That you
emotional,
can't help.
spiritual. Yeah, and they're not going to be pleasant. But what we decide to do about that, how we choose to look at that, and maybe sometimes, suffering through something is exactly what we should do. Maybe sometimes that is the choice we should make. But I think a lot of times we don't need to do that. We make things. In fact, I had pretty limited contact with my family. I texted them every day and spoke to my wife maybe once a week while I was in Spain. But, in the early part of the Camino, it's like all I was talking about was my feet, and how much my feet hurt. And they shared with me later that they were even getting tired of hearing about my feet, kind of like, we get it, Blaine. You're walking roughly 35 kilometers a day. What did you think? What did you think was going to happen? So I finally made peace with it. I finally decided I can't let that part of this journey take away
Ruin the
from
rest.
all the other things that are happening. Um, but it was hard. It was hard not to be kind of upset at, well, why am I getting these blisters and other people aren't? And why is this so hard for me and other people aren't suffering? And it was just one of those things I had to deal with. To me, it was part of my Camino. That was something that I had to deal with on that particular journey.
How did the physical, mental, and spiritual aspects of the Camino transform you?
Well, probably more ways than I could count or even know at this point, because I think it continues to change me over time. But the way I try to describe it, because it's a difficult question to answer for someone, especially who hasn't done it, and they're curious, but they don't really understand what the Camino could be. It felt to me, and I don't think you have to walk 500 miles across Spain to accomplish this. I think anytime we get away from our normal environment, and especially if it's in a natural setting, where we've got nature around us, and we kind of disconnect from all of our technology and all of the thoughts and the things that we're normally so focused on every day, it gives us the ability to, it's almost like layers of yourself just keep getting peeled off. It's like an onion where you just keep peeling back one layer at a time. And I felt like over the journey across Spain, that was happening to me. And it was almost like the real Blaine was eventually kind of showing himself. And sometimes that actually was unpleasant, to kind of really get to know yourself and look at yourself in a way that you don't normally see yourself, and say to yourself, I don't like that. That's not pleasant. In combination with that, for me personally, I got much more connected to my feelings. And so, a concept like we're all connected,
Mm-hmm.
right? As human
Mm-hmm.
beings, we're all connected. That's
Mm-hmm.
a very easy concept intellectually to kind of understand. Like, okay, I've
Yeah.
heard that. I understand it. I get it. But to actually like feel it in your heart, like
Mm-hmm.
really, really understand what that means at a level that was much deeper than what I experienced in my normal life. So it was the
Mm-hmm.
combination of kind of like being stripped away of all the masks that I wear and the
Mm-hmm.
roles that I have in my life and all the
The
normal stuff that's
noise, the
all the
voices.
noise, stripping all
Mm-hmm.
that away in combination with really being able to feel much more deeply and even emotionally
Mm-hmm.
experience emotions at a much deeper
Mm-hmm.
level. I mean, I cried every day on the Camino, and yet my adult children would tell you that they could count on one hand the number of times they've seen me cry. So it's not like this is something I do often, but the Camino just brought about all these emotions in me where every day I would, and it wasn't sadness all the time. It could have been happiness or it could have been a beautiful
Mm-hmm.
sunrise but I was just in a much more kind of emotional state than I
Connected,
am in my
grounded
normal life. Yeah.
moment. Yeah, I agree. If you had to choose one moment that is particularly dear to you from the Camino, which one would it be and why?
Gosh, this is
I'm
almost
putting you on the pedestal
impossible. Yeah,
here.
this is almost impossible to answer. Because
So many sunrises I could only imagine.
yeah, and I also, I mean, fortunately, you said, you know, pick one as opposed to like pick the
What
best
would?
one
Yeah, yeah.
because it's impossible for me to rank, the things that happened to me
Mm,
and say one was better than another. So I do have something I could share, but you have to be patient with me because I have to back up and tell a little bit of a story leading up to it. So
mhm, mhm.
I made a huge mistake on the second day of my Camino.
Oh no. Tell
So
us.
this is all basically leading up to my first like big epiphany, my first
Hmm.
big like
Hmm.
wow moment on the Camino. But before I got to that, I had made this decision on the second day because I was feeling so good. I decided on the second day that I would walk what most people would do in 2 days because I felt like I needed to get ahead of my schedule. Like now that I'm feeling so good, I don't have any, at that time I
Hmm.
didn't have the blisters yet.
Hmm.
And so I was overconfident and as I shared with people, other people walking, how far I was going to go that day, I could just tell by the look in their eyes. They didn't
This was
say
not
it.
going to be a good idea.
Yeah, they didn't have to say it. They just had that look of pity, like, oh, this poor
Mhm.
man. And earlier that day, before it got really, really hard, I was leaving this little town that I had stopped in to find some food. And a man from England came up to me. His name was Fleming. And we struck up this conversation, and I just really enjoyed his company. And then while we
Mhm.
were talking, these two sisters from Australia came up, and we all were having this great conversation. And I'm just enjoying the English and the Australian accents,
Mhm.
and I shared with them how far I was going that day. Basically, my goal was the city of Pamplona, and that was the first time that people didn't look at me with that sense of concern or pity. I could tell, even though they had not planned to walk that far themselves, I could tell by their expression that they were kind of curious about, oh, so you could maybe get all the way to Pamplona. Anyway, I had to end the conversation because, I've got a long way to go. And so I left them
Mhm.
and continued on. And as the day wore on, I literally started just coming apart. That's when the blisters started. There were times I think I was so dehydrated that I started to mentally like I felt like I was off the trail. I wasn't sure if I was going in the right direction. I was starting to get really frustrated because I had no idea how much farther it was. I didn't have GPS or anything to guide
Mhm.
me.
Mhm.
Um, and I stood up on top of this hill and I was so angry at myself and so frustrated with this decision that I had made that
Mhm.
seemed to be just a really bad mistake. And I'm screaming at the top of my lungs while I'm shaking my fists at the sky. I don't know who I was yelling at, but I was just completely broken in that moment.
Mhm.
And the
Mhm.
only thing I knew to do was to turn around and retrace my steps and go back to whatever the last town was that I had passed through and basically stop my goal of going to Pamplona, go
Mhm.
back, find a place to stay, and just forget about it. And it's just really
Wow.
frustrating to me that I've done this thing. As I
Mhm.
start walking down the hill, and I have not seen people on the trail for
Mhm.
hours,
Mhm.
three people are coming up the hill. Fleming, and the Aussie sisters, who had
Really?
just decided after talking with me that they were also going to
Gonna
press
do the
on and
same
try to
thing.
get to Pamplona. So not only did they
Wow.
have GPS and they were energetic and they kind of were like,
Mm-hmm,
come with us, you can do it, just follow us. It
mm-hmm.
made me realize in
Wow.
hindsight how, again, not only how connected we are, but how
Mm-hmm,
such a random interaction that we have with another person, we never really know, like, what could that mean later on? I just happened to mention to these three people in passing what my intention was. That was not their intention that day.
mm-hmm. And
And yet here they
suddenly,
were, like, saving me in a way. Like, here they were
mm-hmm,
picking me up
mm-hmm,
off the ground. And so it's like, it just reminded me that we never know when they have these random interactions with people, how what we'll say or do with someone could not only affect them, but how it ultimately might even affect us in some way. And
mm-hmm.
so just
How
that whole
much?
idea that,
Yeah.
like, we're all connected, we're all kind of on this same journey in our own way.
Mm-hmm,
It just really kind of came alive for me in that moment, because had I not had that interaction with them and they had not made that decision to go to Pamplona, I honestly don't know how that afternoon would have ended for me.
mm-hmm. And how much something that I wanted to add on to what you were saying as you were going, how much a ripple effect such a small interaction can really have on you, on the people around you. That was quite the story as I was listening to you go. Um, wow. You've mentioned, Blaine, in 2019, that you took all this information from your journey and you also were keeping a personal diary. Am I right?
Well, it was more just little notes, but kind of like a diary. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. As you were going on the Camino de Santiago, and then later turned this into an award-winning novel. And I want to know what made you wake up one day and go, I need to publish this. I need to get this out there so more people can read about what I did.
Yeah. Well, of course, writing a book was something that had been in my mind for a long time. I think a lot of
Mm.
people have this idea that they'd like to write a book someday.
Mm-hmm,
That
mm-hmm,
we have a story to tell or we have information we want to share with people. But it was more kind of like way back in my mind, maybe someday I'll do something like that. And when I came back from the Camino, I sat down just to write kind of like a summary of the trip, because I had family and coworkers and friends that were curious about, hey, what was that experience like? And so I thought I'd just try to write up a little summary that I could send to people and it would give them an idea. And once I started looking at the videos that I took every day, the pictures I took, the notes that I made, and I started kind of putting together day by day what this experience had been, I just realized it was this huge writing project that would literally be the size of a book. And I thought, well, why don't I just take this opportunity while I'm going to write this thing
mm-hmm,
and turn it into a book? And my hope was it would be something that would be useful for people who were interested in the Camino. I mean, it's
mm-hmm,
not like a guidebook that would tell people, here's everything you need to know. But if
mm-hmm,
somebody was interested in the Camino, they would certainly learn a lot about it by reading it. And then even people who have no interest in walking across Spain, I thought it was still a story with insights and lessons that could be useful
mm-hmm,
for just, life in general. And so I thought, well, now's the time. I might as well go down this journey now of becoming an author and see what that's all about and learn what that's
mm-hmm,
like. And one of the things that became very clear to me when I was writing the book was that I didn't want to financially gain from the book. In other words, I decided that any profits from selling the book that I
mm-hmm.
would donate to charities that support the Camino de Santiago. In other words, I didn't want it to turn into something where I'm making money off of this story, so to
Personal, yeah.
speak. Yeah.
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 You wanted to create a bigger picture so you can help the people around that were going to do or did the same journey as you. I completely agree. Yeah, it's a very nice way of knowing you want to write a book. And actually, before we got on here today, I looked it up. I can't lie on Amazon. I looked at the preview a little bit, and I saw that the book actually follows a humorous tone of voice while still covering deep insights. My question for you, Blaine, is how important is humor in dealing with life's challenges?
Well, I have what people would probably describe as a dry sense of humor, where sometimes I'm trying to be funny, but people aren't quite sure. Is he trying to be
Hmm.
funny, or is he is he serious? Like, what's he saying? Um, and I think I developed that humor probably through the challenges of childhood, and I didn't really have any people around me that demonstrated that way of
Hmm.
being, of looking at life in a more lighthearted way, or trying to find the
Hmm.
humor in difficult situations. Um, but I do think that one of the things that, oh, I can only speak for myself. I'm assuming others would feel the same way, but certainly for
Hmm.
me, one of the things that frustrates me the most is that I have certain expectations about how I think things should be or will
Hmm.
be.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
when those expectations are not met, when things don't go the way that I wanted them to go, I will get a sense of frustration about that.
Hmm.
And instead of getting mad or frustrated about it, but being able to kind of just look at the humor that might be involved in this thing, this church clock tower is going off every 15 minutes and the
Yeah, yeah,
whole,
yeah.
I mean, you could choose to just be angry about that, or you could just kind of laugh at the absurdity of
Mhm.
there's a clock going off all during the night every 15 minutes. Like,
Yeah.
this is just the craziest thing. And so I think having the ability to turn something that you're potentially frustrated about into
Hmm.
something that you look at more like you're fascinated, like, this is
Hmm.
fascinating, and be able to laugh about it. It's not that you're saying that things are always funny, but you're taking, I guess, a more lighthearted approach as to what life gives you, because it often is not going to be what you expected. And so again, you can choose to be angry and mad about it, or you can choose to just kind of smile and say, well, isn't that a funny thing?
Hmm. Step out of your own shoes and look at the perspective from someone else's eyes, say, and realize it's actually quite comedic. Yeah, I agree.
I
And
mean, and life
sometimes,
really is, if you think about it, and maybe this takes, living longer and longer to
mhm.
realize this, but life really is pretty funny. I mean, it's
Yeah,
tragic. It's tragic
I agree.
too. But when
Yeah.
you look back on a life, it's like there's a lot of stuff that's like, there's a sense of humor in there somewhere.
I know. I completely agree. And I think I can speak for the majority, if not all of the listeners right now, that when you look back, you can, to interactions, to say projects that you've worked on that weren't necessarily pleasant, you sort of just giggle and catch yourself smiling at all that you've come through. So I want to know how it helped you during your pilgrimage. You're seeing these challenges as a more comedic in a more comedic way.
Well, I think it's just, um, you could either laugh or you could cry. That was kind of like, those are the two choices. So,
Yeah.
and
And
I'm not saying that I was always making the best choice every time, but some things were so absurd that you just almost had to laugh. It was like you couldn't make this stuff up. You couldn't write this into a comedy series, and here it is, life happening right in front of me. There was
yeah.
a particular evening where I got to a place that didn't have any beds left, and the only thing that they could offer me was a mattress on the floor, and it
Mhm.
was literally just this one room stone hut from like the 12th century. I mean, it was like something out of a movie set. And so the other pilgrims, as we're called, they
Mhm.
were up on this wooden platform along the walls, and I was on the
Mhm.
floor, and I was so
Mhm.
close to everybody else that I could have reached up with my hand and like touched people. And I was on the same floor space that everybody had to cross over in the middle of the night if they needed to go
Mhm.
use the bathroom outside. And um, but at some point in the middle of the night, this young man from Italy and this young woman from Denmark decided that this was their opportunity to have some intimacy. And so I'm just on the floor, like listening to these two people, in lovemaking, so to speak. And I couldn't, I mean, I had to probably put my hand over my mouth because I really wanted to just burst out laughing. Like, I cannot believe that here we are, a dozen people in this one room stone hut. And these two people have decided in the middle of the night that this is their opportunity to be intimate with each other. And I'm on the floor
Mhm.
here witnessing this. And again, I mean, I could have gotten angry or upset or thought, well, why are they doing that? But at the same time, it was just so absurd that I just had to laugh. And so that kind of thing happened, more than you would think on the Camino.
Mhm.
I'm not
Mhm.
saying the lovemaking part happened more than you would think. I'm just saying
Yeah,
that
yeah.
that opportunities for humor and just looking at the absurdity of something
Mhm.
was happening all the time.
That's a great way to end that part actually, because I was just about to push you further into your life now, to your diverse career in financial services and public speaking. And that was a really funny way to end it. How did your experiences on the Camino de Santiago influence your professional life?
Well, because of how it kind of transformed me in terms of
Discipline.
being well, not so much discipline, but becoming more aware of feelings and
Mm.
what it did with my speaking is that it made me comfortable being much more vulnerable and
Mm-hmm.
much more transparent with an
Mm-hmm.
audience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that can be kind of a scary thing when you're up on a stage speaking to a group of people, and
Mm-hmm.
even if you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about business related things or work
Mm-hmm.
related things, to kind of just to be more real with people, kind of just more human. And what I found was that once I started doing that, I started actually connecting with people in a way that I would have never connected with them before when I was kind of in that business mode,
Mm-hmm.
business
Mm-hmm.
presenter kind of speaker. And so I,
Serious,
I really
formal.
give the Camino the credit for almost changing the way that I express myself and being more comfortable just sharing things about myself that it's not that I mean, if I'm kind of, I'm kind of willing to share anything if somebody asks me, but I'm not the kind of person that just volunteers a lot of information
Mm-hmm.
about
Mm-hmm.
myself. I mean, even going back to what I explained about my childhood, I'm more the observer. I'm the one who's looking around the
Mm-hmm.
room and kind
Mm-hmm.
of reading everybody else as opposed to one that wants to be the center of attention. Um, but the fact that I was just more willing to be so open about things, it almost probably kind of surprised and shocked people, but in a good way, because then they felt like, well, they can relate to me more. They could relate to things I was sharing and how it applied to their own life. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think it just made me a much more effective professional speaker because I was willing to speak from my heart, so to speak, as opposed to my head.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I suppose I can ask you if that helped you actually in becoming more passionate about the work you do.
Well, I've always been passionate about the work that I do. I guess I'm more passionate about talking about things like what we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about today. I mean, things that, in my opinion, really matter. I mean, I know
Completely
it's important
changed.
that people learn how to do a job and what the particular things are that they need to know to do that job, but I'm more interested in talking to people about life
Mm-hmm.
and so work and school and all of those things are part of it, of course. But I guess if anything, it's made me more interested in speaking to people about life skills as opposed to
Right.
work skills.
Mm-hmm. Because I suppose no matter what it is, in what industry you work in, you can't really do the best version of a project that you can do unless you really get to know yourself in terms of what you like, what you don't like. So I agree. And I
I
actually
agree
want
with
to.
that. Yeah,
Mhm,
that's a very profound thing you just said.
I want to actually redirect your focus again to the younger audience, not to you, but to the listeners. So, for any teenagers, students trying to figure out their career paths, what advice would you give them if they're struggling with finding their passions and their purpose?
Yeah, that's another really good question. And
Quick, you're on the timer.
I would say stop the struggle. I
Mm.
would say stop struggling with it. I think that's part of the problem. I think we spend too much time looking for answers outside of ourselves. It's like I have to discover my passion, or I have to find, the meaning of life and why I'm here, and what am I supposed to be doing? And I think those answers oftentimes they're already in
In
us.
front of you. Hmm.
We just have
Yeah.
to be able to recognize them. And
Hmm.
so maybe what that means is that we have to actually disconnect from all the other noise around us, and we just need to take a day or two and, you know,
Really see what matters to you.
yeah, I think the fact that we even think that it's a struggle is the first part of the problem, because we're working too hard at it. And
Hmm.
it's not, I'm not suggesting that that these things shouldn't be important to us and that they shouldn't matter, because I really think they do. But I
Hmm.
don't think we have to work as hard at it. It's almost more of a letting go as opposed to a finding it kind of
Hmm.
thing. At
I
least,
agree. I
and
agree.
and
Yeah.
that's now I would not have been able to say that though, 20 or
Before.
30 years ago,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
I think it takes having lived a lot of my life to be able to now look back and say, oh, what was I struggling for? But when you're younger, you're in the struggle, right? So
Hmm.
it's kind of like I can give that advice, but I also can appreciate that it may be hard for younger people to really be able to do that, because they're in that stage of their life where they think they have to kind of figure it all out.
Yeah. Seeing it from your perspective now, it made me realize that, yeah, even though you get a lot of pressure from school, from applying to universities, deciding on what your passions are, what you want to do in the future, your friends or your family telling you this is perhaps what you have to do, looking too hard for a passion can sometimes not make you realize that it's really right in front of you.
Right.
So,
For
my
sure.
next question, Blaine, is how do you balance your professional life with your personal hobbies and passions and adventures like the Camino de Santiago? Do you dedicate a week for a hobby and say the next one for the other? Or do you do multiple things each day?
Yeah, this is another thing that has evolved in my mind over time, and
Mm.
I think it's another, for lack of a better word, another struggle that many people have, especially young people when they really start their adult lives, where they're in the workplace and maybe they are starting a family or buying a home, or just taking on a lot of responsibilities that they didn't have when they were young. How do you balance that with your personal life and the things you want to spend time doing? And
Hmm.
I don't actually believe that in this idea of work-life balance.
Mm. Why?
I think it's work-life integration. I
Mm.
think it is about finding a
Hmm.
way or designing a life where one isn't exclusive of the other. My personal life is not separated from my work life.
Hmm.
Now, of course, the danger in thinking that way is that we can get so absorbed in something, say, like work, that we've neglected our personal life, or vice
Rest.
versa, or we
Yeah.
put so much attention on our own needs that we're not very good, anywhere else.
Hmm.
So I guess for me, um, it's just trying to integrate the two together, to combine the two together in a mixture that works. Where and in the, I guess as I look back over time, it's never an equal balance. So sometimes I'm much more focused on career things, and other times I'm much more focused on personal things. But that's okay, because I figured out how to make that over time work. And of course, the thing I can't forget about is that there's no way I could do something like, leave the country for a month to walk the Camino without a lot of support from other people,
Hmm.
whether it be my wife or my family or my coworkers, or I mean, to be able to sometimes do the things that you want to do personally or professionally. It's not just about what you're going to do. It's also about the
Hmm.
other people that are supporting you in that effort. And so kind of all those things together have to be um, paid attention to, so to speak. And I don't know that that's a great answer to your question, but that's what's on my mind now.
No, it is, and I agree. Blaine, you were named America's greatest thinker for arguing that cooperation benefits society more than competition. How has this belief influenced your life and work?
Well, let me step back for a moment and just explain how something like being named America's greatest thinker even happens, because that sounds
Big.
amazing,
Yeah.
but it's like, well, how does something like that happen? So there's an event that takes place here in the U.S. called the Great American Think Off, and it's been taking place for 30 years. And basically every year they pose a question to the nation. And the way that you enter the event is that you write a 750 word essay that answers the question. And so that the question that you're referring to was whether competition or cooperation benefits society more. And I decided to write an essay, to pick a side, to write an essay. That ultimately led to being selected as a finalist. And then these finalists actually gather in person for a live debate, and an audience of several hundred people choose who they think made the most compelling case. And so, and not only in 2005, which is when that question was asked, did I win, but I also won again in 2022, so 17 years later, which is just stunning to me that my brain still works. There was a related question that had to do with, what should be more important, personal choice or social responsibility. That's not that different of a question if you think about it. So I chose cooperation, and I chose social responsibility over personal choice, not because I don't believe in the other option, but I just think that the value to society, the value to the world, I look at things much more in a what's better for we as opposed to what's better for me. And so to kind of get back to your question, having that outlook that we are more important than me, where I'm kind of trying to live as almost an act of service, if you will. And it's not that I am not selfish. I mean, I can be incredibly selfish. I can do a lot of things that are just strictly for me. And
But it's that perspective of helping other people.
Right. Overall, what I'm striving to do is be more aware of what's good for all of us as opposed to just what's good for me.
Yeah, that's a very good answer. And I think a lot of people now, especially if they're in America, they might consider, becoming America's greatest thinker or taking part in the competition. What role does independent thinking play in achieving success, and how can people cultivate this skill?
Yeah, I think independent thought, or what I often call critical thinking, is such an important skill, especially in the kind of complicated times that we live in now. I think first of all, it starts with being curious, with being someone who's more interested in asking questions than telling people what you think. And it sounds almost contradictory as someone who's a professional speaker by living to say that we should be more interested in listening. But I guess even in my professional speaking, what I'm really trying to accomplish is to get the people who are hearing me to think. In other words, I'm not telling people how to think. I'm just trying to create the ability for them to think in different ways than they've thought before. So being a curious person where you're asking a lot of questions and you're kind of looking at the world almost as a child does, I think is a useful thing in developing your own thoughts. And I think I would call it like diversity of thought. In other words, a lot of people only get their information from a place or a couple of places, whether it be a particular social media site, or whether it be a particular news source or something that they watch on the internet. And what I would suggest is that to be an independent thinker, you want to get the information about a particular topic from a wide variety of sources and then
Mm-hmm.
come to your own conclusion about what you think. Because unfortunately, you can pretty much find contradictory information about anything that's out there. So if you're only
Mm-hmm.
getting information from, say, one side of an argument, then you tend to think that that's the way it is because that's all you ever hear. But
Mm-hmm.
if you try to expose yourselves to different points of view, well, that can be a little harder because now you have to kind of think for yourself. But
Mm-hmm.
that's the whole idea of your question, right? Is how do we
Sure.
become more independent thinkers where we're making our own conclusions about things as opposed to just listening to what other people have to say?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think the world needs more independent thinkers because
Yeah.
it's really easy to just follow what other people think. Um, but it's harder to kind of think critically about, well, what do I really believe? In fact, I would suggest that we don't even know what we believe until that belief has been challenged,
I agree, especially in
right?
today's full world filled with social media, where we
Right.
get so many different opinions, so many different parts of a story. You sort of think, well, which side should I pick or which one is best? Blaine, now I actually want to redirect the focus back onto you and ask if there's anything new in terms for your future goals. If you have any more adventures you're going to go on or projects on the horizon that you'd like to share with us.
Well, as my wife would say, she knows there's always going to be something coming.
That's for
um,
sure. Yeah.
back to the support that I talked about earlier. It really, if I did not have her full support, and I don't necessarily have her understanding, because I'm sure there are many things that I do and have done that she doesn't understand why, but doesn't matter. She still supports me, and I wouldn't have the comfort in doing these kinds of things if I didn't have her support. And one of the things that she has come to expect with me, and we've been married actually. Well, it's 38 years this month. So a really, really long time. She knows that there's always going to be something else.
Hmm.
So sometimes I don't know how to answer that question that you've just asked because I don't have anything in mind just yet, but I know that something will happen. But I do actually have something that I can share, which is that I'm going back to Spain to walk another Camino this fall.
Oh,
And
really?
I haven't figured out exactly what it will look like. My thought is that I will not walk the same path, so to speak.
Yeah.
There's many different routes that people take. There's the one that I did initially that most people, that's the one they do, but there
Hmm.
are many different routes throughout Spain to get to the end point, which is Santiago. And so my thought is I might explore some of the other paths, some of the other trails. But I feel like I need a booster. I need to get back over there
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
and do some more walking. So
And
my
now,
plan this fall is that I'm going to go take another month and walk in Spain.
best of luck with that one. Now you have all of the opportunities and the knowledge to go and do it even better and even easier and to rediscover yourself all over again.
Yeah, it should be. It should be. I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse because as I've been thinking about it more and more as it's getting closer, I actually have more. Anxiety is probably not the right word, but I have
Things
I
going
have
on,
more. I have more things in my mind that are worrying me because I know,
what it can be
what
like.
it
Yeah.
can be. I mean, I guess the
Hmm.
first time I did it, I really had no idea, so I was just
What you
kind of
were
willing
setting up
for it to be
yourself.
whatever.
Hmm.
And now because I know about all these things, it's like I'm almost overthinking it. So I need to make sure before I go that I just kind of shut all that down
And you
and
go
and
lighthearted into it.
just go, just go. Yeah, it'll be whatever it's going to be.
Yeah. Thank you, Blaine, for agreeing to this. But just before we get off, as a final, let's say, call to action for any young listeners just starting out their careers in no matter what fields, what advice do you want to leave them off with or any knowledge?
Well, I would suggest, and again, this is just based on the stage of life that I'm in and the fact that I can look back. I've been in the workforce now probably 40 years. And so I have a very different view than people who are just getting started would have.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully what I'm going to share, still has relevance and meaning for someone who's just starting out. But I would say, to be patient, to not feel the pressure to have everything all figured out already. I think I've always thought it's kind of crazy that we hardly have lived life, especially life on our own, and yet we're already supposed to know, you know, what university we're going to go to and what we're going to be when we grow up and what our career is going to be. And it's like, how in the world are you supposed to know all of that when you haven't really done much other than be in school? And so, just to not feel like you have to have it all figured out so fast. And then when you do enter the workforce, to not be to again be patient, to not be impatient about, I immediately want to be promoted and I immediately want to get a raise and I immediately want to have these responsibilities. To just, learn as much as you possibly can, right? Be
Trust
that
the
curious
process.
person that asks a lot of questions. Most importantly, figure out how you can add value. How can you take your unique talents, gifts, things that you're interested in? How can you use those things to better the organization, the product, whatever it is that you're getting involved in? How can you make it better by you being a part of it? And I guess ultimately to me, it's a balance between making things happen and letting things happen. And that to me might be one of the hardest balancing in life to try to do, because part of me is very much a make it happen kind of person. Like I want to make this thing happen. But then part of me realizes that oftentimes you can't, and that what you really need to do is let go and kind of let things happen. And but either side to an extreme is probably not the right choice. It's probably a blend of how much do I try to make things happen versus how much do I try to let things happen. And that's why I think it's so hard to do that, because how much you do of each is going to depend on lots of different things. And so that would be the advice, is to try to just recognize that there's a balance between those two things, and do your best to balance it out.
And I guess, not wanting, being okay with not having everything from day one can save you from a couple of blisters or a couple of challenges on your workflow.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah. Thank you so much for sharing so many different aspects of your life and for being on the podcast today. It's been a pleasure, Blaine.
Absolutely. And your questions were amazing. So congratulations to you for a fantastic interview. And
Thank you, Blaine.
can't wait to see what else you're going to put out there in the future.
Thank you. Good luck with everything that you've got going on. And this fall, the Camino again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Wasn't that quite the conversation? All right, let's unpack what we just talked about with Blaine. We explored how his unconventional childhood, shaped by constant movement and a free school experience, laid the groundwork for his future success. We then dived into Blaine's Camino de Santiago's pilgrimage. We learned about the inspiration that propelled him onto a 500-mile trek, the challenges he had conquered, and the profound physical, mental, and spiritual transformation he experienced. But Blaine didn't just stop there. He turned his pilgrimage into an award-winning book called Soar Souls, Soaring Soul Changing. Isn't that quite a tongue twister? We also learned how the lessons of the Camino influenced his impressive career in finance and public speaking. So here's what I want you to take away from today's episode. From what you just listened to Blaine's journey, I want you to think about how you've been feeling lately. Have you been connected with your spirit and with your soul? Or have you been overwhelming yourself with work, especially as it's exam season for teenagers and for students now in universities or high schools. From a world filled with noise, I want you to step back and really think about what matters for you. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and family or anyone that's interested about getting to know themselves even better. Because leaving a review and sharing these episodes is what helps us continue bringing you more amazing content with amazing guests. And if you want to follow Blaine Rada's journey, make sure to follow him on LinkedIn. But of course, most importantly, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen to something that will inspire you. Remember, one step a day will lead you closer to your ideal life. And if no one tells you today, I believe in you. See you next time.